Hey, I'd really appreciate if you went and followed my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Stevens5. The link is also in the description down below. Also, I'd appreciate if you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Enjoy the video. Going into this game, both players were on 4 out of 5. Brandon Jacobson, I should mention, is a young player from the United States, rated 2504. Illya Nyzhnyk is a Ukrainian grandmaster who came to the United States to study at Webster University. He's currently rated 2683, which puts him in the top 100 in the world. In fact, it probably puts him in the top maybe 60, maybe even top 50 in the world. And Nyzhnyk is actually one of the youngest grandmasters ever. He got the grandmaster title at the age of 14, so he's a very strong player. And in this game, Jacobson with white played d4, knight f6, c4, g6, so Nyzhnyk decided to go for a King's Indian here with d6, allowing Jacobson to get the 3 pawns in the center. And the King's Indian is not a bad opening at all. It's considered a little dubious at the very highest level, but you can certainly still play it as a grandmaster, which Nyzhnyk demonstrated in this game. So castles h3 was played, avoiding possibly bishop g4. Also, often in this opening, white wants to put their bishop on e3, and you don't want that to run into knight g4. So h3 is a precise move to avoid that. Here, black played knight a6, which looks a little odd, but the idea is somewhat simple. You just want to try to eventually put your knight on the c5 square. And you're probably going to go e5 to try to eliminate this pawn or force it to move forward so that you gain the c5 square. And that's exactly what happened in the game. And you might think that this is a free pawn. After takes, knight takes, it looks like white is simply up a pawn. There's actually a couple reasons why this isn't a free pawn. For one, you can go rook e8 here, and just put pressure along the center. And after a move like knight to f3, now knight to c5 comes, and, well, suffice it to say, I mean, white is going to lose a pawn. This e4 pawn is just not well defended enough, and that's going to come with even more problems with their king in the center. So, alright, let's see. D takes e5, D takes e5, knight takes e5. So yeah, rook e8 is one possibility. The other thing here, if black wants to get their pawn back immediately, they can go knight takes e4, which is a discovered attack on the white knight. I mean, things could potentially get very complicated here if white wanted to give up their knight as well, as a desperado sacrifice, saying that, okay, I'm going to lose this knight anyway, but now there's knight takes c3, and both queens are attacked, but when everything is said and done, black just has 3 pieces, or 3 minor pieces, white has 2, so this is just winning. Because when white took on f7, they were taking a pawn. When black took on c3, they were taking a piece. So, all in all, after knight takes e4, bishop takes e5, yeah, black got his pawn back and has a comfortable position. So, that's why white decided not to take on e5. He played d5. But now this just kind of shows you Nyzhnyk's whole strategy here. He goes knight to c5, and he really has a very nice grip on the dark squares here. These knights are putting pressure on e4. The c5 square is very strong. And while black has slightly less space here in the center, black is putting a lot of pressure and has potential to possibly go f5 and put more pressure on the center in the future, somewhere down the line. So bishop c2 was played, a5, just taking space and also avoiding b4 to get this knight out of the c5 square. Castles was played, knight f to d7, preparing f5, bishop to g5, f6, bishop to h4 was played, and here h5, and this looks a little crazy because you are pushing a pawn that's in front of your king, but black can afford to potentially go for an attack here. Their king is safe enough and the position is closed enough that it's not going to be so easy for white to attack. Or black can simply keep their pawns as is, and these pawns aren't really weak enough for white to do anything about it. So white played a3, black played knight to b6, hitting c4, b3 was played, queen to e8, rook to b1, and now g5 was played, as I mentioned earlier. Now the queen will come to g6, so h4 first, and queen h5 even one step further. b4, take, knight to a6, knight to d2, offering the queen trade, which was declined, with g4, really trying to blast things open. King to h1, bishop to h6, h takes g4, bishop takes g4, f3, and now a wild move, queen to g5, saying, okay, you can take my bishop, and then I'll take your knight on d2. So rook to f2 was played, defending d2. Now bishop to h5, bishop to d3, queen goes back to g7, uncovering the bishop. Possibly the bishop is going to come into e3 or f4 at some point. So queen to e1, knight to c8, maneuvering this knight to eventually come into the game. Knight to e7, knight e3, bishop g5, knight f5. So a lot of slow maneuvering in this game. Queen h7, take. And you can see the computer screaming for white to go f4. And this really opens things up in white's favor because they're actually the one who's possibly getting their rook active. And that was played in the game. And this is a nice move. After take, white is pretty much winning because of h4 being such a big weakness, and f6 as well. But, okay, it's not so easy, and of course Nyzhnyk did not take on f4. So queen d2 was played, trying to put more pressure. Bishop to g6, hitting e4. Knight to b5 was played. Bishop takes f4, rook takes f4, possibly trying to lift the rook. Queen to e5, and now bishop to c2. An interesting move. Here, one move that makes a lot of sense is simply rook b to f1, just putting more pressure on f6, doubling rooks. But okay, bishop c2 was played in the game, queen to h5, and here you see that the computer gives white a winning advantage, knight to d4, h3, but as you'll see, it's actually not so simple. And here what white needed to do, knight to e6 is a very reasonable move, but you need to take care of your king first. If you simply just go g3, then black's attack is kind of shut down, and you're threatening to put a knight on e6. You're going to bring pieces to the f-file, possibly, and put more pressure there. And everything is going in white's favor. It's very hard for black to create any play with things all locked down. But after knight to e6, things get very complicated. And this is roughly where I tuned into the game live. And at this point, okay, rook to f7 was played. And again, another opportunity for white to go g3. But after queen e3, things get very complicated. And here, for a second, I was thinking, oh, wait, isn't black winning? Because there's h takes g2, king takes, and rook h7, which was played in the game. And here I was thinking, well, I mean, your king is really wide open here, and queen g3 is the natural move to stop queen h2, but then there's queen to e2 check, rook f2, and bishop takes e4. But I just completely forgot here that the bishop is pinned, so this is not really an option. That being said, after queen to g3, what black can do is, well, I mean, there's really a number of options here. One of them is king f7, although that blunders knight g5, so I guess not. Really, I think it's better at this point to rely on the computer to analyze this position than to rely on me, because it's very complicated, and there are a lot of tactics. Like, one nice move that the computer suggests here is knight takes b4. And after rook takes, there's queen h1 check. So you can't take back. This is really quite a wild position, though. So, yeah, but that didn't happen in the game. Here, white played king to f1, trying to possibly run the king and sidestep any issues. Here, queen to h2 was played, queen f2, take, rook h1. Here I was kind of expecting king e2 from Brandon, because you really want to use the g-file if possible, so I thought this felt much more natural. King g2, you're putting your king on the g-file, and now it's much harder for you to use the g-file to your advantage, and possibly even black could get in rook g8 at some point and turn the tables on white. So take, king to f7, and here rook to b2 was played, simply defending b4. Another move that I don't completely love. Here in the game, my first instinct was c5, because on knight takes b4, you can, for one, go rook b2 and try to win the b7 pawn. So yeah, I mean, rook b2 here makes sense, or take, and then rook b2 also makes sense. So knight takes b4 isn't too much of a problem, and this just seems to be at least putting pressure here. You know, you're threatening to take on d6 and give black a weakness. Rook b2 just feels too passive, in my opinion. But of course, I'm not a grandmaster, and rook b2 does have its own ideas, as we saw in the game later on. Rook g8, king f2, king e7, and here b5 kind of shows the idea of rook b2, because now the rook is behind the mobile b pawn, which might even go to b6. So knight b8 was played, bringing the knight to d7, rook a2, knight d7, rook a7, rook b8, knight takes c7, and knight takes c7 makes a lot of sense. It does seem to be a free pawn, but there's actually this very nice move, bishop to f7, and this really restricts the knight. And already here, Brandon probably, I'm not sure if he saw bishop f7 or not, but he probably wasn't very happy to see this move. Because the problem here is if you make some natural move, let's say you go king e3, there's king to e8, or king to d8, sorry. And now this knight is just in trouble. The only square it can go to, well, I mean, you can go knight a8, but the knight is still trapped on a8. It can't go anywhere from there. And the other square that makes sense is knight to e6, but after take, knight c5, this pawn is just going to fall. You can even go king e7 and pick it up with the king if you want. And so Brandon here decided in the game that he didn't want to go knight e6, he didn't want to go knight a8, so he decided to go b6 and give up a pawn so that his knight could get to b5. So after bishop d3, knight d7, preparing knight c5 or knight e5. Bishop c2 was played, knight c5, rook a1, rook to h8, rook to g1, rook to h2, rook g2, rook h1, And, you know, this is just a lot of slow maneuvering at this point. Nothing particularly... No point in this game that's particularly interesting, I would say. At least not in this specific part of the game. Okay, so rook to h7 was played, king to g6, rook to e7, take. And somewhere around here, it was when things kind of started to slip a little for black, or sorry, for white. Because while it actually looks like black's pawns are weak, they're well defended, and it's very hard for black to... it's very hard for white to really attack these pawns. The knight defends b7, and d6... Really, the only way that white can attack it is by going rook e8 to d8. But even then, black can go rook a6 if they want. So rook h3 was played, knight to e3, rook h4, hitting this pawn and winning it. There's really nothing you can do. And here, Brandon, I guess he was getting low on time. He made kind of an error here. The best chance to hold this position, and really this is more out of principle than out of like a specific line, but it's really just to keep pieces on the board, keep rooks on the board, because keeping rooks on the board provides much more chances for counterplay, and gives white better chances to hold the draw. And when you go into a knight endgame, well, I mean, this weak pawn is going to be a big problem, and if this pawn is lost, then you are very likely going to lose the game. A lot of people say that knight endgames are very similar to pawn endgames, and that's because the knights do a bad job of targeting weaknesses. They also don't do a very good job at stopping past pawns. So often the knights don't actually make a huge difference. You know, if one side is up a pawn in a knight endgame, they're going to be likely winning, similarly to if they're up a pawn in a pawn endgame. And here it's no different, because after king g5, the king is simply coming to f4, and you're going to lose the e4 pawn. Knight f3, king f4, knight d4, king takes e4, knight e6. Here, king to e5 was played, forcing the knight away, and now you just go king to d4, and you're going to take all of white's pawns, and this is just winning. And here, Jacobson resigned. I thought this was an interesting game to share with you guys. It was certainly a wild one. Both sides were winning at some point. And, yeah, I hope you enjoyed the analysis.